Good day, everyone. Today, we will be discussing the management and the human resources, the learning objectives. At the end of this lesson, the student should be able to understand the challenges faced by the management in using people as human resources, understand the implications of changing the environment for the way people are managed, develop effective strategies for managing tension and conflict at work, explain why underpinning philosophy is a necessary part of effective people management, and lastly, understand why the emotional dimension of work is critical to the effective management of people. Managing people in the 21st century. It might seem strange to begin our analysis of the management of human resources in the 21st century by looking back in time. But the reason for this is to do with our ability to learn from the past and to use this understanding to help make sense of the challenges facing management today and in the future. Learning about the way in which people have been and should be managed involves using our personal experiences of managing and being managed, and for the more serious student, it also involves assessing the wealth of ideas, theories, stories, and research outputs contained in the numerous books and journals devoted to the subject. Not all of these are contemporary, and while many of the most influential were first published many years ago, there are no less important for that. Despite people's interest in understanding what managing organization and people involves and the ever increasing amount of information and knowledge available to us, the enduring paradox is that many of today's managers still find the challenge difficult and frustrating. Even where seemingly major breakthrough in our understanding of management occur, Peters and Waterman 1982, it soon becomes apparent that many of successful companies and managers identified by the authors have been unable to sustain their success in the face of rapidly changing environment and the contradictions inherent in employing and managing people. The quotation is taken from Tony Watson's influential book in Management and the Organization of Work and reflects the experiences, sense of frustration, and uncertainty articulated by one manager. It is an excerpt from part of a conversation between the author and the manager. So the problem is, it's the people management thing. It's handling the people who work for me. They are constant headache. I've tried to read the books and I've been on people management courses. I didn't miss one of the OB classes on my MBA course, but I still despair at the difficulty I have been with managing the people in my function, sorting out who is going to do what, getting them to do things I want, getting them to finish things on time, even getting them to be where I want them. And that's before I get into all the recruiting, training, appraising, and all that stuff. It is highly probable that this manager's frustrations with his staff and what managing them involved was mirrored by their sense of frustration and dissatisfaction with him as a manager and the way in which he practiced management. Of course, there are many other managers who are confident about what they do and would claim to be a good at it, pointing to positive feedback from their staff as evidence of their competence and effectiveness. But the real point of the story is that despite his efforts and those of others in a similar position to learn about managing and to become a better manager, he felt that he hadn't succeeded. Why? Was he looking in the wrong place, reading the wrong books, or listening to the wrong lecturers? We don't know why he failed to make progress. Like so many others, whether they are students or human resources, specialists, or line managers, although he was committed to becoming better and managing people, he just didn't seem to have much progress. How do we manage people's be found? First of all, it is important to realize that this question is more rhetorical than literal. There are no answers as such, at least in the sense of universal and permanent solution to the kinds of problem this manager and many other face. But if we are realistic and do not expect the search to be an easy or straightforward one, the fact that there are those who have found managing less problematic and by consensus are considered to be a good managers suggests that there is much we can learn. The important question though is not only about what managers needs to learn about managing people, but whether they are learning and as a result of becoming more effective in their role. Robert Sutton, in his witty but perspective book on managers and other employees and other behaviors, supports the idea that people leave their manager rather than their organization. He believes, using this distinctive American expression, that most of us unfortunately have to deal with the actual in our workplaces at one time or another, and no actual rule shows how these distinctive characters damage their fellow human being and they undermine organizational performance. Buckingham and Kaufman link the quality and effectiveness of managers and the performance-oriented behavior of their subordinates to answer the following questions. Do I know what is expected of me at work? Do I have the materials and equipment I need to do my work right at work? Do I have the opportunity to do what I do best every day? In the last 7 days, have I received recognition or praise for doing good work? Does my supervisor or someone at work seems to care about me as a person? Is there someone at work who encourages my development at work? Do my opinions count? Does the mission or purpose of my company make me feel my job is important? Are my coworkers committed to doing quality work? Do I have a best friend at work? In the last 6 months, have someone at work talked to me about my progress? This last year, have I had opportunities at work to learn and grow? The more the answers to these questions are in the affirmative, the more likely the employees will value his or her manager, be a high performing worker, and less likely to be thinking of leaving the organizations. Managers are seen as critical to how a person behaves and performs at work. They argue that the talented employee may join a company because of its charismatic leaders, its generous benefits, and its world class training programs, but how long the employee stays and how productive he is while he is there is determined by his relationship with his immediate supervisor. Accepting that many organizations have understood the importance and implication of these questions and have acted accordingly, while others still seem to struggle, we need to know what it is that accounts for such variation in the competence of different managers. One explanation might be linked to the position of different traits and abilities that are more inherent than acquired, and which lead to a certain individuals having the potential to be better managers than others. It might also be because they have learned to be better managers through reflecting on their personal experiences of managing and because of their sensitivity to the effect that their behaviors have on others. Is good people management something that can be learned using the right theories, concept, practices, or is it like leadership a capability that some argue you are somehow born with? They quote a manager who attended one of their classes who realized the danger of an unthinking or casual approach to benchmarking. We have been benchmarking the wrong things. Instead of copying what others do, we ought to copy how they think. Learning how to become a better manager of people isn't quite as easy as some would have us believe. Of course, the difficulties that contemporary managers appears to face in learning the secrets of managerial success might have a completely different explanation. Could it be the case that the very nature of what managing people involves has changed so much and continues to change of such a rapid pace that what he can learn from the past and from our contemporaries quickly loses its value and relevance? The idea that the past has an important contribution to make to understanding the challenges contemporary managers face is grounded in the belief that learning about anything is always built upon what is already known, what has already been tried, and what was worked or not in particular condition. While the past provides neither neatly packaged answer nor the secrets of good people management, they aren't any as such. It does offer insight and reference point that help us to make sense of where we are now and to consider whether the challenges managers face now are the same, different in degree, or different in kind to those fact earlier generation of managers. Lots of people would have been toiling in rather unpleasant conditions. The temperature would certainly have quite hot. different kinds of raw materials and have been moving around the site, and the skills and energy of many different kinds of people would have been used to complete the project to specification. You might even have witnessed an odd accident or two and have noticed groups of people wearing different clothes, walking around and looking important and generally checking up on things. It's also conceivable that instead of watching from afar, you might actually have been out of a thousand of workers engaged in the building. Depending on your own skills and experience, you might have been an overseer, the equivalent of a modern day supervisor, with the responsibility for organizing resources and making sure the workers did what was required of them. If it's difficult to project yourself so far back in time, consider a more recent period, the industrialization of Britain in the 19th and 20th century, and specifically the construction of a country's rail and canals network. Where did all the workers who built those monuments to Victorian Britain came from? How did they learn the skills they needed, and who determined what and how they are paid? A tentative conclusion that emerged from these brief references to previous eras might be that, despite differences in organizational form, the power of managers, technology, and social relationship, the challenges that managers face, the experiences of being employed are not fundamentally different today from the experiences of our predecessors. But while we have suggested that the fundamental might not have changed much over time, it is also undeniable that the condition in which people are employed and managed have changed as our economic, political, and social system have evolved and become more sophisticated and employee oriented. They have to do this in an arena of rising expectations from all stakeholders, global competition, and an ever changing balance of rights, duties, and responsibilities. But the challenge to management goes beyond this. They also have to ensure that the individuals and the teams creating these goods and services work environment that are rewarding, provide opportunities for personal growth and development, generate commitment to the organization, and lastly, encourage employees to use their capabilities and potential to full and in the interest of the organization. It might be argued that those charged with managing organizations have two distinctive but related challenges to meet. First, they have to ensure that the interests and objectives of the organization itself meet. Second, they must understand and go as far as possible to meet the legitimate interests and needs of their employees. For the students trying to make sense of whether these two challenges are equally important, it might be worth nothing what one successful employer and managing director remarked. In conversation with one of the authors, William Beckett, head of a small but successful plastic manufacturing company in Sheffield, commented that the relationship between this is clear. If I don't ensure that the company remains competitive and survives, then my employees' interests don't matter. There won't be any employees or managers for that matter to worry about. The basic premises of this book is that however difficult a challenge managing people represent, some managers and some organizations have been more successful than others who continue to struggle. Why is this? In trying to answer this question, it is worth remembering that while many organizations claim to be successful, the success is often short-lived and has little to do with developing sustainable people management practices that are effective over the long term. Today's challenges. Before we move on to consider the nature of challenge that all managers face, it is important to consider the impact of contemporary changes in work and employment that have helped to shape the internal and external environments within which managers have to operate. The changes outlined below represent the distinctive and influential characteristic of the postmodern age of employment. First, the rise of self-employment and the independent workers. Many more people are free to work or not, depending on their particular circumstances, than ever before. Those who want to choose to work also have more choice with regards to who they work for, the kind of work they do, and for how long they are prepared to work. What is effort? Effort or performance that is additional to that which the employee is contractually required to deliver. Discretionary effort. by definition, is determined by the individual employee or by a group of employees and can represent a significant additional resource if they choose to make this available to management. It can be both of as the difference between the employees are minimally required to give and what they are capable of giving. One problem with trying to increase the level of discretionary effort is that it is often associated with additional payment and is only made available if it is paid for. This has the potential of increasing the cost of labor, creating the paradox of increasing performance but lower productivity. Psychological contract. This term is used to describe the unwritten, often unarticulated, and not necessarily shared expectation that exists between employees and managers as representatives of the organization, which influence the relationship between the two parties and particularly the behavior of the employees. Second is changes in the external regulation of employment. The power of managers to act unilaterally is in areas such as hiring and firing promotions, and payment has been reduced by development in UK and European legislation that gives greater rights to employees and create new responsibilities for employers. Third is the emergence of new ideas and ways of managing associated with the inward investment and the spread of new knowledge, the removal of unnecessary and restrictive differences between managers and employees, the harmonization of terms and conditions of employment, the removal of restrictive labor practices, and the emphasis of a new culture of pride and achievement represent some of the groundbreaking changes that may have permitted parts of the manufacturing sector. Workers who were previously associated with the worst excessive of industrial conflict and inefficiencies have now become the valued employees of some of the most profitable companies in the country. The starting reality is that this transformation has been achieved with some notable exceptions with the same labor force. Fourth is the challenge to and replacement of physical power and manual skills by the power of the knowledge, creativity, and intellectual capital. The increasing importance of knowledge-based industries and the corresponding rise in the number of knowledge workers is creating a different kinds of labor force, which has different requirements and expectation of work and different expectations of how it will be managed. The implication of knowledge-based work and the growing numbers of knowledge workers for the way people are managed extend to the need to align reward for sensitively with the motivational characteristics of this kind of employee, the nature of supervision and what managing the knowledge workers actually involve, the intrinsic importance of work, and lastly, the work-life balance issues. Multiculturalism is not simply a description of a new society, but of a culturally diverse workplace. New migration patterns are adding to the demographic mix from which the labor force is drawn. Labor market activity rates are increasing among ethnic minorities, and the increasing numbers of female and older workers have become economically active. These developments are affecting the need of the different employment and working arrangement with flexible and varied contracts, home working, and career breaks becoming well established in certain sectors of the economy. The position adopted throughout this book is that successful HR managers are those who are able to achieve those objectives that are critical to the successful operation of the organization through ensuring that the supply of human resources is consistent with the changing level of demand, pursuing strategies that result in improvements in the efficient use of labor and increasing levels of labor productivity, maintaining sufficient levels of control of employee behavior, generating employee commitment and engagement, and lastly, developing employees as human beings and as economic resources, and ensuring that as far as is possible, fundamental employee objectives are also met. This includes to be treated as a human being first and then as an economic resource, to be recognized and valued for what they contribute, to be allowed to develop as a person and a resource, and lastly, to be treated and rewarded fairly. The reality is that often these objectives are not always completely compatible, and in certain circumstances, they may be in conflict. In fact, it is probably more realistic to think of the relationship between the two sets of objectives as being in a state of dynamic tension. Deconstructing human resource management. Before we can begin fully to understand the challenges facing the HR professional and the line managers, it is necessary to look more carefully at the components parts of the human resource management and to consider each element separately. Human resource management is not simply a label, an approach to managing people, or a convenient abbreviation. It actually represents something far more complex, the understanding of which is profoundly important to those with managerial responsibilities. We need to extend our understanding beyond the superficial and ask the question, what does human resource management actually mean? Employee as human being. People's objectives of work and employment have been briefly touched upon earlier. It is now necessary to explore the nature of what being human means in ways that help to explain how and why and their role as employees before behave in the ways that they do. A useful starting point is to examine the assumption made about people that are used, often unconsciously to help managers make sense of what managing people involves. Perhaps the most well known contribution to our understanding of the attitudes and behaviors of employees comes from the work of Douglas MacGregor in 1960. MacGregor presented a dichotomy of the assumption made about people which he labeled Theory X and Theory Y. The Theory X assumptions are based on a belief that first, the average human being has an inherent dislike of work and will can avoid if he or she can. Second, because of their dislike of work, most people cannot be trusted to do a good job and therefore need to be controlled and closely supervised. Lastly, people generally prefer to be directed, dislike taking on responsibility, will not change much beyond what they already are, and desire a high level of security. As a result of this assumption, under Theory X, managers need to develop working environment and organizational controls that reflects the unreliable and problematic nature of their employees. Theory Y assumption, on the other hand, are based on a different view of people and the way in which they are likely to behave at work. They reflect a view that people enjoy work as a natural and necessary part of the human experience. Tight control and the use of punishment are not the only or the most effective ways to make people work. Employees are capable of self motivation and self direction and can, under certain circumstances, show a high level of commitment to management and the organization for which they work. And lastly, the average person is capable of learning and changing and will be prepared under certain circumstances to take and exercise responsibility for his or her and other actions. As a result of this assumption, under Theory X, managers need to develop working environment and organizational controls that reflects the unreliable and problematic nature of their employees. Theory Y assumption, on the other hand, are based on a different view of people and the way in which they are likely to behave at work. They reflect a view that people enjoy work as a natural and necessary part of the human experience. Tight control and the use of punishment are not the only or the most effective ways to make people work. Employees are capable of self motivation and self direction and can, under certain circumstances, show a high level of commitment to management and the organization for which they work. And lastly, the average person is capable of learning and changing and will be prepared under certain circumstances to take and exercise responsibility for his or her and other actions. The conclusion reached by MacGregor is that because of this exercise of Theory X based management practices, which he argues are based on a simplistic and partial understanding of people at work, there is a significant gap between what people are doing and giving at work and what they are capable of. This is a point taken up by O'Reilly and Lefort in 2000, who argue that because of Theory Y assumption or the inability and reluctance to create environment that reflects a Theory Y view of their workers, many organizations are failing to unlock the hidden value and potential that their employees offer. They claim that the hidden value is not scarce or unique, but rather can be found in all companies. It resides in the intellectual and emotional capital of the firm and is in the minds and hearts of its people. Although the organization we describe have used this potential to achieve great success, most companies squander this resource even as they Vermont its scarcity. The significance of this argument can hardly be overstated. It is quite simply that there is, in most organizations, a productive potential that managers are failing to access and utilize because they base their approach to management on mistaken assumption about the nature of employee motivation. Moreover, because of the assumption that most people fit McGregor Theory X description, management practice based on this belief also becomes a self-fulfilling hypothesis. Employees treated as if they are Theory X people will conform to the stereotype. Arising from the work of people such as Andrew Mayo in 2001, a set of beliefs emerged that transform our understanding about work and what people expect from it. First, work is a social activity involving people working together in groups and teams. Second, the need for security, sense of belonging, and recognition is more important for moral and performance than the physical working environment. Third, an employee is a person whose attitude and effectiveness are conditioned by social expectations that exist both within and outside the place of work. Lastly, when employee complains, then the complaint may have some basis in fact, but can also be seen as a symptoms that reflects changes in their status or sense of self-worth. The so-called Hartham effect, which is arguably as relevant today it was when it was first used, suggests that the treating employees as human beings, showing that management has an interest in them and cares about them, will under most conditions result in behavior that is associated with higher levels of production and performance that would have been generated had management failed to demonstrate this concern and consideration. It can be argued, therefore, that the Hawthorne effect is a consequence of applying theory Y assumption to the management of people and can be seen as representing further evidence to support the beliefs of Leffer and Sutton that many organizations are failing to access and utilize employee potentials. William Owich's contribution to the debate about how underlying assumptions influence the way in which managers manage people is found in what he terms Theory Z Owichi in 1981. In his work, Owichi takes as his starting point the need to adopt a theory Y perspective, arguing that workers, first, are capable of demonstrating a strong sense of loyalty, second, will respond positively to working in teams because they are social animals, and lastly, if trusted to work in demanding but not cohesive environment can will reflect the interests of the organization as well as the team. Oichi's description of the management practices that flow from this conceptualization reflects what can be described as modern Japanese management, which emphasizes personal responsibility and accountability, collaborative working, devolved decision making, and harmonized working conditions. The debate about whether theory X or Y accurately reflects the nature of people as employees is often presented in terms of whether people correspond to one or the other sets of characteristics. This is both unhelpful and simplistic. It seems to us much useful to accept the fact that people have the capacity to be both, and that whether they display the negative characteristic of a Theory X employee or become a more valued and desirable Theory Y employee is driven by their experiences at work, particularly those that relate to how their managers treat them, and the extent to which they see this treatment and reflecting a genuine concern with their social and psychological needs. Whether managers are dealing with Theory X or Theory Y, people is not. Therefore, a function of any inherent and deep-rooted differences between people. Although some of the predisposed to conform to one or other profiles, but rather reflects the experiences of being managed and the environment in which they live and work. MacGregor recognized the importance of caring about people's attitude, which dictates behavior. He pointed out that we are defined by how we think and that if we don't change our basic assumptions about people, we will never change what we do. Windy stated that MacGregor believed that organization could not be seen as machines with interchangeable human parts, but as living organizations and communities which would enable people to grow and develop and contribute to business goals. It shows that For him, the way towards organizational success started from this way of thinking rather than one that associated with gimmicks, procedures, or specific programs. What he offers those interested in change and improvement are not simple prescription based on wishful thinking, a sentiment caused by Herzberg when he said, "Treat me as I am, not as you wish to be me," but as a challenge based on understanding human nature and what building successful organization involves, expressed in his statement that I will venture the prediction that we will succeed in increasing our utilization of human potential in organizational settings only as we succeed in creating conditions that generate a meaningful way of life. The issues raised by McGregor and developed by Hill et al. Are developed in more detail in the section on management. Our mission is to maximize sales, provide value to our customers, and give quality customer service while still having fun and maintaining our values. These values include nurturing creativity, growing together, admitting our mistakes, promoting a happy, healthy lifestyle, enhancing our sense of community, and striving to become self-actualized people. O'Reilly and Pfeffer accept that this people philosophy and the need to develop them to be best they can be is at odds with the prevailing view withheld by others American retailers and most other industrial companies. It is a philosophy and an approach to managing people that would be difficult to copy, but it is an approach that has worked for this company. People, pain, and toxicity. A more recent contribution to our understanding of employees as people and of their behavior at work comes from Peter J. Prost in 2003 and his pioneering study of the emotional dimension of work. Prost concepts that what he describes as toxicity or emotional pain is a normal byproduct of organizational life and that the organization of emotional pain is an inevitable part of doing business. He argues that normal levels of toxicity rarely cause long-term damage because of workers' coping strategies, such as the ability to rationalize, to empathize with each other, and to engage in pressure releasing behavior, which together with the positive effects of toxin handlers, which means that more often than not, there is an acceptable level of emotional pain that is constrained and flexible. Ross, after recounting a story of an employee who had experienced what he considered to be a lack of understanding and compassion from her manager during a difficult period in his life, talks about unfeeling responses can undermine people's confidence, esteem, dignity, and sense of connection to others. It disconnects them that the capacity to respond completely to their painful situation. The importance of people as human beings needing to feel connected and part of something is also central to Harvey's explanation of the Abilene paradox. A similar book on management and organizational life which we refer to again in next chapter. What do we know about the frightens us into such apparently inexplicable organizational behavior? Separation, alienation, and loneliness are things we don't know about and fear. Both research and experience indicate that ostracism is one of the most powerful punishment that can be devised. Solitary confinement does not draw its coercive strength from physical deprivation. The evidence is overwhelming that we have a fundamental need to be connected, engaged, and related, and a reciprocal need not to be separated or alone. In a presentation on May 2010, the power of a positive emotion at work is Newcastle Business School. Professor Michael was made a similar point about the importance of understanding the basic human condition, the way negative experience affect the individual and undermine their role as worker. He made the following points that relationships are one of the most potent sources of human misery. Example, the death of a spouse. Second, troubled relationships are the most common presenting problem in psychotherapy. And lastly, chronic conflict and hostility damage the immune system. Whilst these comments relate to the human experience in general, they have an obvious implication for the physical and psychological health of people in their working roles. Firstly, positive working relationships are critical source of well-being and stability, and this relate to managers and fellow workers. Second, the interpersonal conflict and hostility can have psychological as well as the psychological effect, and this can manifest them in low morale, poor productivity, and absent. We would argue that the need to be connected and the importance of a person feeling his or herself to be part of something and valued is fundamental to what is being human means. Many employees are motivated to avoid the psychological damaging effects of excessive work-related pressure and the effect of the organizational toxicity, although we accept that individuals vary in relation to their ability to cope with such pressure and toxins. According to Stress Management Society, stress can be defined as a situation where demands on a person exceeds that person's resources or ability to cope. Interestingly, people may suffer from stress because of too little pressure as well as too much, as Figure 1.1 illustrates. Figure 1.1 suggests that workers who are underutilized and feel frustrated because of this may also react in ways that are detrimental to the organization, either by simply staying and adjusting to their situation or leaving and seeking alternative and more rewarding employment. But the experience of going beyond what is above described as the optimum position in the relationship between capabilities and work pressure is the one that is closely associated with the conventional understanding of what stress means and what it is linked to be. But stress is not simply a function or excessive work pressures. It can be also a result from how people are treated at work and specifically how they are managed. According to the Stress Management Society, quoting evidence from the Health and Safety Executive, there is a clear link between stress and ill health. Based on a survey on 700 senior HR practitioners and almost 2,000 employees are reported by Personnel Today, the society claimed that 105 million days are lost to stress each year, costing UK employers 1.24 billion. 11% of absence is attributed to stress. 52% says stress is increasing. 60% claims stress is damaging staff retention. And 83% thinks stress is harming productivity. Professor Carrie Copper, who helped draw up the NICE guidelines, is reported to have said that I think central to all of this is your manager. Nobody damages your health more is the workplace potentially than your managers. People as a resource. From an economic and business perspective, rather than employees being seen as people, people are seen as productive economic resources, or to use the language of HR, human resources. From this perspective, employees represent an input to the productive process. They are seen as an economic factor of production with a value and a cost. People are employed not because of employer altruism or because they deserve a job, but because they possess valued physical and intellectual capabilities that are needed in the production of goods and services. People as economic resources become, in a one sense, commodities, that is, they have a value that expresses their importance to the productive process, which is reflected in the fact that they have a job that are paid in a wage or salary. When their economic value as a productive resource is false, they may will lose their jobs or experience pressure of wage or salary reduction. It is more likely that the cost of employees are as economic resources become more significant in shaping employers' employment strategies during a recession rather than during periods of economic expansion. But the cost of labor is also a factor in business decision to offshore production facilities where companies move from high to low cost economies. As a commodity, people have no rights as such, although as human beings in employment, they enjoy varying degrees of protection from the ability or desire of managers to treat them as a commodity. But even these rights do not prevent managers from terminating the employment contract for reasons to do with the changes in the need for or value of an individual. And as the demand for goods and services falls or the cost of production becomes excessive, then the rationale for employing people is removed or displaced from one location to another. This acceptance that each individual has an economic value commensurate with his or her capabilities partly explain why some people are paid more than others. But does this also mean that some people are more important than others? And does it justify managers treating some differently and more favorably than others? Whose value to the organization is less obvious? From an economic perspective, the answer must be yes. While we as employees all share the same or similar requirements to be treated as human beings, as an economic resource and providers of productive inputs, we do have different values to the organization because the value of our contribution differs. This is an important point because it provides a rationale for the application of differentiated employment policies, under which certain groups or individuals are treated differently with regards to rewards, trainings, and development opportunities and promotion. People as assets. The interest in but difficulty with seeing people as commodities and treating them in the same way as other tangible assets is that they do not fit the strict definition of an asset. According to Mayo in 2001, employees have to be seen as intangible asset because they cannot be transacted, example, bought or sold at will, or their contribution is individual and variable. And lastly, they cannot be valued according to the traditional financial principles. The inability or reluctance of many organizations to value their human assets can, however, have important consequences. First, managers who are unable to estimate or calculate an individual worth or value to the organization are also unable to develop HR practices that reflects these differences in employee performance and contribution. This effectively inhibits the development of an individual or of the differentiated approach to the management of people, with the implication that the one size fits all mindset will continue to be adopted almost on a default basis. Second, return on investment in training and development will be difficult to calculate because of managerial inability to measure any changes in employee value through increased competency that might follow from such investment. The re-emergence of this interest in the economic value of people as resources and assets through growth in what has been described as the expense model of human resource accounting. Mayo 2001 and Fitz ends 2000 confirms that importance to organization of finding ways of allocating financial value is to employees' assets value and of being able to calculate the value of employing people through the systematic measurement and evaluation of their cost and the value of their contribution. This is by no means an easy task, but it is nevertheless one that is seen as increasing important if HR is to engage with and support an organization's economic and financial agenda. The enduring paradox that managers struggle to resolve and which is fundamental to understanding the challenge they face is that employees are both people with human requirements and sensitiveness and economic resources with differentiated and changing asset value. This dilemma faced by successive generation of managers is perfectly captured by Henry Ford, who once asked why he always had to deal with the people or the person with he had only hired a pair of hands. Hands were what he hired, but troublesome bodies with querulous minds were what he so often got. Management. As function define what needs to be done and the nature of the contribution required to achieve the stated objectives, management, despite its complexities and different traditions, can be understood as being about clarifying objectives, planning and organizing, directing and controlling. According to Chig et al. In 2005, this functional and rational approach to management associated with such people as F.W. Taylor, Henry Fayol, and Henry Ford not only identify key management activities and responsibilities but also explicitly includes employees from any meaningful part of what management does. organization based on hierarchy, centralized decision making, and a belief that employees were incapable of anything more than following orders, produced managers and an approach to management that is associated with scientific management and Freudism, significant elements of which are still influential today. But this historical emphasis on functionality and rationality needs to be put into a more contemporary context in which, first, as change and increasing complexity becomes the norm for these organizations exposed to competition and a dynamic external environment, these core functions may in themselves be sufficient to deliver all of required outcomes, and so new management activities may emerge. Example, the need to communicate, to consult, and to motivate. Second, because these functions are essentially technical in nature, they demand specialist knowledge and skills to carry them out to the required standards. Who carries them out, example, who is seen to or can act managerially, becomes a question of competency rather than hierarchical position. This conception of management, reflected in the concept of empowerment, means that as the workforce becomes better educated and technically equipped to manage, there is less need for people in formally designated management positions. Such a realization is associated with the notion of self management, self direction, and self control. Lastly, challenges emanating from postmodernists raise questions about the effectiveness of the traditional approaches to management in delivering sustained economic success in the context of rapidly changing environment. One of the important outcomes of this debate has been the realization that understanding what management involves requires us to accept not one but several different types of rationality. What this point actually means is that old ideas that management is the province of only those with the managerial responsibilities, that it is only done to people, and that employees can easily be organized, directed, and controlled while still retaining some support, are not the only ways of understanding what management involves. For those with responsibility for managing organization, it is important to consider the limitations of the first conceptualization and also the implication of the second. Support for many of the conclusions reached on the changing nature of management in the 21st century is given by the findings of the Tomorrow Project by Monarch and Worsley in 2001, which reported on condition of work and employment until 2020. It found that there will be more self-management, outsourcing will create less opportunities, higher skilled jobs will increase employee discretion, manager will be developed new ways in which to supervise and delegate work, people will want greater responsibility, more mundane job will be transformed to make employment feel more like self-employment. This brief unnecessarily limited analysis of the nature of management and its relevance for the management of people at work does, however, allow us to conclude this section with the following observation. First, the traditional divide between those who manage and those who are managed is being narrower, increasingly blurred, and in certain cases, reversed with the number of managers being reduced and the responsibilities passed to individual or groups of employees. Second, changes in the nature of work illustrated by the growing numbers of knowledge-based jobs makes traditional ideas of what managing involves increasingly inappropriate. The knowledge owned by the such workers cannot be easily appropriated or reflected, and this means that the organization cannot control and motivate the workers as easily as they believe they could when dealing with a less skilled and more dependent workforce. And lastly, social and technological changes have resulted in much more complex and varied working patterns, with an increasing number of employees working from home or away from the office for long periods. Changes have resulted in managers and HR specialists having to redefine what managing such staff involved. But the point made earlier by William Beckett that without a viable business, any talk of managing people, either well or badly, becomes irrelevant is still fundamental to this introductory exploration of the human resource management. It has this status because it locates people in a particular type of relationship with employers and employing organizations. Managing people is not the primary aim of the managers. Managing the business or the organization successfully is what managers will be judged against, and according to Robert Heller in 2003, this means that in the final analysis, management comes down to three simple words: revenues, cost, and quality.
A focus on a core business outcome doesn't mean that the people are not important, far from it. But it does not mean that understanding and addressing the needs of people as human beings is critical to their status and productive economic resources and their ability to contribute to these business goals. However, difficult it is to some people to accept. People are not an end in themselves but a means of an end. Although a humanist psychologist MacGregor understood this rule and the relationship. According to Hale et al. In 2000, MacGregor believed that the organization would be far more effective when managers offer employees the opportunity to align their individual goals with those of the business. His thinking reinforced the pragmatic message at the core of the famed psychologist Abraham Maslow's work. People are capable of extraordinary accomplishment if they are able to meet their own self-fulfilling needs while pursuing the goals of the organization. A philosophy of management. A philosophy of management is far more than a single ingredient, that's something extra which explains why some managers seems to be able consistently to outperform their contemporaries. But there is an extensive anecdotal and empirical evidence that a particular type of philosophy is associated with the managerial effectiveness and the organizational success, and that this philosophy is deeply rooted in the belief about people and their behavior. O'Reilly and Pfeffer in 2000 emphasized the importance of philosophy and the assumption managers make about people and provide detailed accounts of the management styles and practices of 8 successful American companies which share a similar approach to managing people, in which managers identify with a distinctive set of values and principles that influence and give consistency to what they do. Collins and his teams of researchers were not interested only in the identifying great companies. They wanted to identify the underlying reasons for sustained success, or as Collins put it, I think of our work as search for timeless principles, the enduring physics of great organization. I believe if an organization is to meet the challenge of changing world, it must be prepared to change everything about itself except those beliefs as it moves through corporate life. In other words, the basic philosophy, spirits, and drive of an organization have far more to do with its relative achievements than do technical or economic resources, organizational structure, innovation, and timing. All these things weigh heavily in success, but they are, I think, transcendent by how strongly the people in the organization believe in its basic precepts and how faithfully they carry them out. Perhaps the most significant conclusion that emerged from this statement is the importance of getting the people that organization employs to understand and support the values and beliefs espoused by their managers. Too often, managers make the mistake of assuming that simply publicizing mission and the statement is sufficient and that commitment automatically follows. This rarely happens. Living a philosophy is much more difficult and demanding than articulating and publicizing one. Reference to the importance of an underpinning and integrating philosophy can also be found in the HR literature, and their important but largely unrecognized work on personal managers. Buckingham and Elliot in 1993 argued that simply possessing basic competencies is not a sufficient condition for generating managerial success. They suggest is much more a function of the concept they use, their values, and how they relate to others. Underpinning their personal characteristic and how they work is what they describe as a conceptual mindset, which they defined as a perspective on their role and its purpose that is significantly different from their less highly rated colleagues. They equate this mindset to a philosophy of personnel management that is strongly rooted in a clear perception about and a real commitment to the value of good employees and of their contribution to the company. Buckingham and Elliot found that those personal managers who were rated more successful than others subscribed to a personal and professional philosophy that helped to shape their thinking and the way in which they discharge their responsibilities. Thus, combined with an ability to conceptualize and mobilize a range of more effective personal characteristics was seen as the reason why they were considered to be successful HR managers. A findings that lends further support to the belief that those involved in the management of people need to underpin their behavior as manager with a clear set of values and beliefs about the employment of people and the relationship to the organization. In summary, the chapter also serves as a reference point for those that follow, by which we mean that any particular area of HR, whether recruiting and selecting staff or training them, needs to be carried out in ways that reflects the interests of the organization and those of the people who constitute its human resources. While it is accepted that external forces influence the degree to which management can act on these requirements, it is also important to recognize that these forces do not determine how people are managed. And also, it is a clear from references made to those organizations which stand out for being successful businesses and which also enjoy inviolable reputations for being good places to work, that there are choices to be made about how people are managed, and that these choices have consequences for such things as the quality of employee relations, employee satisfaction and performance and retention rates. And lastly, treating employees as people and as economic resources is not a mutually exclusive proposition. It is neither one or nor other, but getting the balance right in the context of each organization's circumstances represents a fundamental and enduring challenge that not all managers seems capable of meeting. And that's the end of my discussion. I hope you learned something and thank you for listening.